Welcome, everyone. We just started the webinar, so we're going to give a few minutes for everyone to join. Thank you for spending your morning, afternoon, maybe some people here nighttime. I know our presenter is on the nighttime. I was going to say something funny, but I didn't have anything to say, so gonna make a joke because Stefan, our presenter, is the best, a very knowledgeable person around, I would say, every product, specifically Entra ID. Gonna get him started here in just a few minutes. The number is continuing to rise. While we're waiting, you can see the fun title, Cybersecurity That Keeps It Cool. I know a lot of you registered a while ago, but just as a reminder, a lot of people who do attend this webinar will be entered into a raffle to get a very nice cooler. We do have a lot, so we're hoping to give a lot away. Thank you all for being here. Looks like the number is slowly stopping, so I'm going to turn it over to our amazing presenter, who is very knowledgeable, all things Entra ID. Stefan, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you, Jenny. And now I better be able to put my money where my mouth is and get you a really good session on this. So let's talk today about identity, Entra ID, and why your customers should care. Just to kind of reiterate, we've recently launched the Barracuda One platform, which for us is a somewhat new way of thinking about how everything we put forward to our partners and customers gets tied together. We've always had a strong email proposition. We've had a good securing data proposition, network applications. But what we've been doing is tying those together in a better way, so that when you have multiple Barracuda solutions, 1 and 1 is not 2, but 1 and 1 is 3, which is really bad math, but it really works well as an analogy for this. What we do with Barracuda One and why Entra ID is landing, or Entra ID backup and protection is landing within Barracuda One, is because identity is a very important component. Now, for your customers, and you as partner have access to the dashboard for Barracuda One, which will give you a complete overview of everything that you need to know, either about your customers or your customers need to know about their environment. Entra ID backup completely fits into that. So having just do a little bit of stage setting, let's talk about identity. So just for you to keep in your head, why would a customer care about identity? Why is it important? And basically the core reason for it is we rely on identity to make sure that we can give people access to systems and data in the right place, in the right time. And if they do not have access, they can't do their job. So it helps us ensure who someone is. We then couple authorizations with that so we can give them access or keep them away from access. And one of the most important things is that if you have a cyber criminal, they will always go for the identity store. It doesn't really matter where that exists, whether it's an on-prem Active Directory or in this case, Entra ID. And if we stop using user identity, if we move away from that, we might as well just stop securing altogether, which I'm pretty sure nobody on this call really wants. So where is a lot of our identity data today? It was originally one of the most coveted data within an organization, and it sat within the Active Directory. Now, if you had told me, and I started with Barracuda in 2018, that Entra ID would be a complete replacement for an on-prem Active Directory for customers, I would have laughed. Because we always knew that Entra ID, while it did some basic functions for the M365 platform, which was then called Office 365, and allowing access into Azure, it really did not take much of a central role anywhere else. It's had your username, it had your passwords, then it was an incredible amount of trouble to get those properly synced. It just really wasn't ready to completely take over as an identity platform. Anno 2025, this is no longer true. One of the key premises for some of the folks that have been in identity and access management for very, very long time have always reasoned from the on-prem Active Directory. And even they went, well, if I start a new company, or if I was a company that had the opportunity, I would no longer have an on-prem Active Directory. And that is something that's being encouraged by Microsoft. And that has a couple of reasons. One, Entra ID has a much more feature-rich environment than it did 5 years ago. And it allows access not just to first-party applications, but the third-party applications and your Microsoft environment. It is an all-round easier experience for the average user and also for the administrator. So what's all contained in Entra ID? Well, of course, there's users, usually in there with an email or a username. So let's take a little bit walk through this, what this would mean for someone like me, who is a remote worker for Barracuda. So my user is Stefan. I'm in the group for technical marketing engineering, or I'm in the group for product. Then I'm in the role for marketing engineering. And then as an administrative unit, I don't really have one because I'm a remote user, but an administrative unit can really be anything as long as it's easier to manage. Now, through Entra ID, I get access to my enterprise applications. Enterprise applications are a representation of what Entra ID should allow me access to. So it's a rules of engagement for third-party applications, amongst other things. For instance, Salesforce, things like NetSuite, anything that you can think of, Jira, will all be enterprise applications within Entra ID, which means that the moment that I log into my laptop, which comes forward with device management, I can log into these systems using my Barracuda credentials. Now, these applications, you don't just get access. You tell them what I need to do before I get access. For instance, I can use my username and password to log into Salesforce. And then we think, wow, yeah, Salesforce really does have a lot of sensitive data for us. Maybe we want to use a third party or an MFA, a secondary token, to log into this third party, which then becomes your telephone or a key. It also tells me how many things I need to do before I get in there. Now, the two other things that remain there, device management and BitLocker keys, it just says, hey, what does my device need to do in order to get access to the Barracuda network? Named locations, an office in Ann Arbor. It's as simple as that. Last but not least, Entra ID has a lot of audit logs. Every time you successfully access your account, it generates a log. If you fail to log into your account, generates a log. And there's a lot more where that came from, but we'll go a little bit deeper into that if we go into the reasons for protection. So starting with this, let's talk a little bit about risk. The only opportunity I have to basically split two things out is I have malicious and accidental loss. I can only through these two elements, I can tell the whole story of what threatens the Entra ID environment. Hold on one second. Something's happening here. Okay, absolutely apologies for that, but there's something just basically crashed in my house and something went wrong. Just to get back to this, there's two risks that we look at from an overarching perspective. It's malicious loss and accidental loss. Malicious loss is that there's someone there who actively tries to harm your environment and tries to harm the identities within Entra ID or your Active Directory, and then there's accidental loss. And accidental loss is just a user that is allowed to do anything or has tasks within the Entra ID environment, and they make a mistake. They accidentally delete something, or they push a policy that they weren't supposed to. And those, with a little good effort, all the risks that we have can fit in one of those two buckets. So what are reasons to protect your Entra ID? First and foremost, it's business continuity. If I wake up tomorrow and I need to get into my primary application, which in case for someone in sales would be Salesforce, I can't work. If I can't work, I can't do anything. If I can't do anything, someone will complain. But it also means, and this is what we've seen, so we were having a discussion with an organization, a customer organization, that had an issue with Entra ID, and they calculated it would have cost them 3 days to recover totally. But it would have been a whole day where even their critical applications would not be accessible. These folks were getting calls from their executives. Hey, I can't access anything. They had Entra ID backup they were able to restore, but they calculated it would have taken them 3 days in order to get to that point where they would be fully operational, which would have roughly cost them 3 or 4 million based on what they would have as a yearly revenue. Entra ID is a primary target of attack. Whenever, and we'll go a little bit deeper into that right after this, whenever a cyber criminal attacks your environment, hitting Entra ID or hitting any identity store is basically jackpot, because at that point, if I have access to that and can change configurations, I can maintain my access forever. Accidental deletion or misconfiguration. I was talking to one of our internal IDP folks, and they said to me, well, it's not a crazy time to have about 30 to 40 changes in a day if there's something happening, like many people get start working, or many people stop, or it's just a change in season, we add new apps. All of those changes individually are an opportunity to make a mistake. Last but not least, compliance and audit requirements. If you have cybersecurity insurance, it will say something about systems that are crucial and are sensitive to your or your customer's environment. When we talk about those, we also talk about Entra ID. They might not explicitly state that to your customers. They might not go, oh, well, here's in this contract, it exactly says that it needs to be Entra ID. But this is very much seen as a primary system because it contains the sensitive data of username and password and potentially identifiable information if it's populated well. In short, accidental deletion, malicious deletion, and misconfiguration. And those last two kind of fit in the same bucket. So how do we mitigate risk? How do we solve the problem for our customers? One of my personal favorites is talking it through the NIST, through the lens of the NIST framework. Why? Because it tells me everything I need to do. From the top right, I need to identify the risks that exist for my system, in this case, Entra ID, M365. I need to protect this. Which measures do I take? So do I reduce access to it? I need to detect if something goes on. Do I read the logs? Do I sit there every day and manually go through those logs? No, but something should. Respond. So one of the funniest things in cybersecurity, if you have a detection that says this is bad news, there are still organizations that freeze. They do not respond. I've seen a user had their laptop encrypted almost right beside me, and he went, oh, I'll fix it later, and just close the lid. You need to respond, pull out the plug, do something. Then recover, because after you've had a cyber attack or after you deleted some data that was not supposed to be deleted, you need to be able to restore it. Often that is through a backup, and that backup, you kind of have to think about in the protect environment. And last but not least, govern. How do I know from beginning to end that I'm in control of this system? I'm going to talk you through these with respect to Entra ID, because this is also the conversation that we have with customers about, okay, what can you be doing? Which point should you be addressing? And what place can I talk about this topic with you? So first, let's take a look at malicious actors. This is one of my favorite things from Lockheed Martin, is their cyber kill chain. It's a very good system to think about compromise. So let's think about Entra ID in the context of compromise. So reconnaissance, what does it mean? It simply means that they're trying to figure out how to get into your system. That is not something you can save your Entra ID from. Well, in theory, but often one of the reasons that it's so good for organizations is it's available anywhere. If I go to login.microsoftonline.com or any of those variants, I can start testing credentials. I can start working with Entra ID. Weaponization. I need a form of malware. I need something to get into the environment. Maybe I need to write a script to compromise a web server that allows me entrance into the environment where one of the goals is to get into Entra ID. Not something that we can do something early on with Entra ID. Delivery. That very much becomes a little bit more interesting. Delivery is often done via email. That's something where we're Barracuda very, very strong at. That's potentially somewhere where we can catch an attacker. Exploitation installation. Hey, they now have a server, they have an endpoint where they can get access to my environment. And then there is the command and control and lateral movement. So C2, command and control, lateral movement. How do I get to more interesting places within the organization? That lateral movement is very much something where Entra ID plays a role. There was a retailer in EMEA, not the Americas, that had a problem. They were compromised through various angles, and the attacker had access to their Entra ID. The reason they knew this is because every time they remediated an account that did malicious things, another account that was either dormant or in other ways not in use would be used to further the objectives of the cybercriminal. So when we think about Entra ID, here and here is where that plays a role. By the way, when they reach actions and objectives, we're usually kind of done. That's usually the part where there's not a whole lot more than that we can do. So I always encourage, which is basically an open door, but do not ever get there. So what do we do to protect Entra ID? And just to step back to identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover, right? Some of the things that we can tell customers that they should do is, identify, do your risk assessment. Make sure that admins that you have, are they reduced? Do you have control of the amounts of admin? That is actually a question that no IT administrator ever likes, because there's a lot of applications that are poorly designed that go, well, I need you to have an admin user, and that admin user is then in there. Privilege creep. Someone starts at a company, moves through the company, becomes a manager, becomes a director, goes into product marketing. They still have rights from an old function. And at that point, we're really good at giving new authorizations. We're really bad at taking old ones away. Same thing goes for stale accounts. I think my favorite example is from one of my own earlier companies I worked for. Was there on an internship. It took them 9 months after my contract was up to actually deny me access to the VPN. This is just the first part. This is just, hey, are you managing your Entra ID? That's not really where we as Barracuda can play a role. It's also for partners, it is good to have that conversation with your customer. If then we go into protect, detect, respond, recover. So protect, hey, do you have security policies that say who are allowed access to when and where? Do you have access controls that say, oh, someone who's managing Entra ID should probably be in our office, or at least from a sanctioned VPN or any sort of that? Do you protect your email, your network, your endpoint? Are there measures in place that when someone tries to breach it, that it gets stopped? It's the bread and butter of cybersecurity. For years, we've put all our eggs in the protect basket, which is fine. But then we come to the next two topics, namely detect and respond. Do you monitor what's happening to your Entra ID? Do you look at the events? When those events get hit, do you respond? Tripping over my words, does your customer have the ability to respond? And when they do, how do they close it out? How do they recover? Are there any lessons learned? Are they able to just do a restore? That is the way how I would deal from a security perspective with Entra ID. Asking myself, my customer, these questions. Do you have an answer for everything that's within this table? Now, when we talk about malicious exploitation, I would love to say that having a backup is the best idea ever. It is. But when it comes to malicious actors, I would really recommend to look at something like XDR, to look at something like Respond. And it can be Barracuda XDR. It can be as long as the customer has thought about what they're going to do in case of a malicious actor getting into this identity store. That's basically the whole thing I want to say about it. Now, I've talked a lot about malicious. Let's talk about accidents. What happens if someone does some configuration work on your Entra ID and all of a sudden they delete access? I would like to reiterate this. I think since you are our partners, you've heard about this multiple times, but SaaS companies do not back up your data. And Microsoft really can't, just to protect them as well a little and not just sound like I'm being negative about them. There is a certain responsibility where Microsoft keeps all the services up and running, the route to the services, and everything that assures that you have access to the infrastructure itself. But your customers and you own the data and identities. And that's where the whole shared responsibility model comes in, which is probably best represented by this graph. Entra ID very much falls into this bucket. It's something that we've talked about for Microsoft 365 backup for ages as well, but it goes just as much for Entra ID as it would for Microsoft 365. So what options do organizations have to recover within Microsoft? Because it's still an argument that we often hear. There's a soft delete function. For users, groups, and applications, you get a soft delete, which basically puts it in limbo, and then it sends you after 30 days to a hard delete. Just to hark back at that slide I showed with those 13 objects, all the other objects in there that are not users, groups, and applications are instantly hard deleted. There is no soft delete function. Once they're gone, and they need to be recreated from the ground up. 30 days is also not a very long time. We've had instances of people going, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, actually, through a project, we removed that, and unfortunately, it was 35 days. And in that case, you will also need to do a lot of manual steps in order to get that back up. That's why we were fortunate enough for our engineers to have the great idea and the mental fortitude to build Entra ID Backup Premium, where within the cloud-to-cloud backup platform, we can say, dear partners and customers, everything that you have within Entra ID that Microsoft allows us to take and restore, we will restore for you. So users, groups, roles, and admin units, hey, who you are, enterprise applications, app registrations, so basically what applications you internally and externally use, the conditional access policies and device management, and if you've ever heard of this Microsoft product called Intune, Intune has a very critical relationship with Entra ID, and we back up those elements within Entra ID that are crucial for Intune. And I will just explain why we stress that so much. Usually when an organization goes into an Intune project to manage their mobile devices, they get a consultant in. That consultant builds hundreds, in some cases, even over 1,000 different policies and elements that tell you how, when, where, why you are allowed access to apps and elements from the organization. Now, if something goes wrong with that, you've lost the work for your consultant. And we've seen that with an organization that tried to build a new top-level policy, which essentially just mitigated all the other, or relegated all the other policies to a lower priority, which in their case meant that they were now in trouble because nobody was getting any access. With a simple restore, that can be recovered. This is all to say, just to bring the story home, with Barracuda, you can give your customers a very, very good start at end-to-end protection for Entra ID. Between Barracuda Managed XDR Cloud and Entra ID Backup Premium, you can cover protect, detect, respond, and recover. All of those for just 2 simple licenses. It's all available through Barracuda One, which allows the central management of the system. And it really, frankly, I find it pretty easy. But okay, I work for Barracuda, so don't let me tell you that. Just allow yourself and allow your customers to experience that. So what we would recommend for next steps. It's actually, there's very much a dollar opportunity. And I'll, aside from the slide, I'll go into this one thing. We've been working with some of our own sales folks that basically fed me back. We can have an 80% win rate on Entra ID with our existing cloud-to-cloud backup customers. They basically eat it up. Anyone who already uses Barracuda and uses Entra ID, it's a very small step for them to adopt Entra ID Backup. So you can align with your Barracuda account manager to discuss your Office 365 buying customers and see where you can add Barracuda Entra ID Premium. If you set up a customer call for any net new opportunity, you receive $100. You can, if you drive a Barracuda approved deal registration, you can receive 300. And if you close a partner-led Barracuda opportunity and get paid out, you get paid out. The more you sell, the more you get. I actually think that's a great opportunity, guys. So with that, I think we may have some questions. And Tiffany, can you help me with the questions, maybe?
Absolutely. We did have a few questions that came in, but if you're on and you just still have some burning questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A portal and I'll get those answers for you as well. So one of the first questions that came through is, if a customer uses a different vendor for M365, can they still use Entra ID Backup?
For a different vendor for M3, if they use, so I think that's about M365 backup, yes. So we have had some customers that were very happy with their own backup vendor for M365, but they did not support Entra ID Backup. And then because they had email with us, they would still go for our Entra ID backup because it just covered that base. So that's absolutely possible. It doesn't bite.
Okay, awesome. Another question we have here is, what benefits does Barracuda have over its competitors with Entra ID?
Currently, we have, there are, I think, about 8 or 9 different competitors that currently do Entra ID backup, or at least that are have a serious footprint. Now, most of them, they started this a little earlier, and they haven't adopted the last data sources. So Microsoft has allowed us to grab more elements. So things like authentication policies, BitLocker keys. Many of our competitors do not support that. We currently support everything that Microsoft allows us to do, and we will be expanding upon that when we, of course, get the opportunity. But right now, we are cutting edge when it comes to Entra ID protection.
Awesome. Well, those are the questions I had here, unless there's some others that you want to quickly pop in. We can certainly read those out. But otherwise, this recording will be available on demand by Friday, so be on the lookout for that. And any other questions you have, you can certainly submit. Okay. Well, I appreciate everyone who attended today. Stefan, you did a phenomenal job presenting this information here. Thank you so much for attending. Be on the lookout for the on-demand link and the raffle that we'll have for the coolers. And we will see you on the next training.
Thanks, everyone.